dream, so acquire wisdom, and whatever you may acquire, gain understanding. Wisdom is the quality of having experience, knowledge, and good judgment, the quality of being wise, according to Mr. Google. As each of you serve in this honorable chamber, it is imperative that although you are wise, that you grow in wisdom. The times in which we live and serve are difficult, and people in our country want instant miracles and quick outcomes. But you will have to navigate between what is good at times or what is best for our nation. You will have to discern what choices and decisions to make and how to frame your contributions in this honorable place. Therefore, you will have to grow in wisdom and how to be faithful to your service, to your nation, and to be true to your convictions. You will have to grow in wisdom and how to make difficult calls that will result in positive outcomes. You will have to grow in wisdom on how to determine when you as an individual and as a team will need more information so that you can make wise judgments that may be hard or difficult for us to receive. Growing in wisdom invites each of us to determine when we need further insight or knowledge on a matter or to ask for help. Proverbs 4:6 states, "Do not forsake wisdom, and she will protect you. Love her, and she will watch over you." I found this poem that I want to share with you on wisdom. It is called Wisdom's Ways by an unknown author. If wisdom's ways you wisely seek, 5 things observe with care. Of whom you speak, to whom you speak, and how, and when, and where. I conclude my presentation this morning with the Serenity Prayer that I have adapted for you. God grant our senators the serenity to accept the things they cannot change, courage to change the things they can, and wisdom to know the difference. Let us pray. Dear Heavenly Father, today we give you praise for being afforded the opportunity to see this last month in 2021. Forgive us for the times we have failed you in our thoughts, actions, and interactions with each other. I pray that you will so empower each senator of this upper chamber with all the wisdom, discernment, fortitude, and courage they need so that they will do their task well and with joy. Help them to turn to you to be their strong tower in the days ahead, and bless and keep them and their families. In the name of Jesus Christ we pray. Amen. Please join in the prayer of our Lord. Our Father, hallowed be thy name, thy kingdom come. Thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen.
Good morning, Honorable Senators, and good morning to the good people of the Bahamas. We'll proceed straight into the order of business. Is there a motion for the adoption of the minutes?
Mr. Vice President, I move that the minutes of the meeting of the Senate of Thursday, 11th November 2021 be adopted.
Is there a seconder?
Second.
It has been so moved that the minutes of the 11th of November 2021 be adopted as laid. All those in favor say aye. All those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. Are there any motions for leave of absence, leave to resign? Swearing in of new senators. Communication by the President. Honorable Senators, at this time, I would just like to communicate on behalf of the President of the Senate, Senator the Honorable J. Lachelle Adderley, to express her apologies that she's unable to be here with us today, but she wishes us the best on this Senate sitting and wishes everyone a happy beginning to the Yuletide season. Messages from the Governor General. Messages from the House of Assembly.
Messages from the House of Assembly.
Bahamas number 3. Message to the Honorable the President and the Honorable members of the Senate from the Speaker and representatives of the Honorable House of Assembly. The House of Assembly acquaints the Honorable the Senate that they have passed the following bills and desire the consent of that Honorable Chamber, namely, a bill for an act for the appropriation of further diverse sums of money for and towards defraying the expenses of the government of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas during the fiscal year commencing 1st July 2021 and ending 30th June 2022. A bill for an act for the reduction in the appropriation of diverse sums of money for and towards defraying the capital expenses of the government of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas during the fiscal year commencing 1st July 2021 and ending 30th June 2022. A bill for an act to amend the Value-Added Tax Act, House of Assembly, Nassau, 2nd December 2021. Patricia DeVoe, Speaker.
Laying of documents by ministers.
Mr. Vice President, I beg leave to lay on the table of the House of the Senate a copy of the following: the Industries Encouragement Approved Product, the Bread Bar Company Limited Order 2021.
Order that the document be brought up. Order that the document do lie on the table. Any further laying of documents?
Mr. Vice President, I beg leave to lay on the table of the Senate a copy of the following: the Quarantine SARS COVID-2 Order 2021.
Order that the document be brought up. Order that the document do lie on the table. Further laying of documents.
Yes, Mr. Vice President, I beg leave to lay on the table of the House the following rules: the Health Services COVID-19 General Rules 2021 and the Health Services COVID-19 Prevention and Management of Community Spread Rules 2021.
Order that the documents do be brought up. Order that the documents do lie on the table. Any further laying of documents?
Mr. Vice President, I beg leave to lay on the table of the Senate a copy of the Price Control General Amendment Number 8 Regulations 2021.
Order that the document do be brought up. Order that the document do lie on the table. Further laying of documents?
Yes, Mr. Vice President, I beg leave to lay on the table of the Senate a copy of the Bahamian Dollar Digital Currency Regulations 2021, Appointed Day Notice 2021.
Order that the document do be brought up. Order that the document do lie on the table. Any further laying of documents?
Yes, Mr. Vice President, finally, I beg leave to lay on the table of the Senate a copy of the report of the Auditor General for the year ended June 30, 2019.
Order that the document be brought up. Order that the document do lie on the table. Any further laying of documents by ministers?
There are none, Mr. Vice President.
Thank you. Communications by ministers?
None.
Communications by senators. Questions? Answers to questions? Presentations of petitions? Appointment of select committees? Reports of select committees? First reading of bills? Second reading and committal of bills? First reading of bills?
Yes, Mr. Vice President, I beg leave to introduce and have read for the first time the Merchant Shipping Bill 2021. If I may obtain a second.
Second.
The chair recognizes Senator the Honorable. Order that the document do lie on the table. It's been moved and seconded. As many? All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, nay. Ordered that the bill be read for the first time.
Bill for an act to provide for the registration of ships, provide for proprietary interest in ships, provide for training certification and watchkeeping related to seafarers, provide for the conditions of employment of seafarers and the health and well-being of seafarers, provide for protection of religion, safety of navigation, safety of travelers, and carriage of bulk and dangerous cargoes, provide for the prevention of pollution, safety and security, the liability of shipowners and investigations into marine casualties, to regulate and develop merchant shipping and related services, to incorporate international conventions into the law, to repeal the Merchant Shipping Act of 1876 and the Merchant Shipping Maritime Claims Limitation of Liability Act of 1889 and for other purposes.
Further first readings?
There are none, Mr. Vice President.
Second reading and committal of bills? The chair recognizes Senator the Honorable Michael Alkitis.
Thank you very much, Mr. Vice President. Mr. Vice President, I rise to move for second reading and committal of the Supplementary Appropriation 2021-2022. Mr. Vice President, I rise to move for second reading and committal of the Supplementary Appropriation Recurrent Account Expenses Bill 2021. And we also have before us the Supplementary Appropriation Capital Account Expenses Bill 2021 and the Value-Added Tax Amendment Number 2 Bill 2021, Mr. Vice President, which we will be debating as a compendium. Mr. Vice President, the presentation of this supplementary budget is to align the proposed budget with the expressed priorities of the new government administration, which took office following the general elections on September 16, 2021, as well as to account for any unfunded expenditures that may have arisen after the passing of the fiscal year 2021-2022 draft budget estimates of revenue and expenditure in June 2021 under the former administration. The new administration's priorities include restoring the economy, social relief to the population, fostering resilient reconstruction, a focus on education, supporting the health and wellness of the population, and empowering our youth. Related to these objectives, and as Prime Minister Davis indicated in his supplementary budget communication, tourism-based economies must push several targeted approaches to the forefront of their recovery strategies. These countries must mitigate the socioeconomic impacts on the livelihoods of their people, boost competitiveness and build resilience, advance innovation and digital transformation within the tourism sector, foster sustainability and green growth, and capitalize on partnerships that advance the transformation sector and promote sustainable development. This list of priorities should sound familiar to you because they can be found within our blueprint for change. We are aggressively pursuing these goals, beginning with the supplementary budget. Mr. Vice President, we have reorganized the budget to allocate existing resources across new ministerial portfolios to align with our priorities. To do this, we have reduced allocations in some areas of the budget to provide funds for expenditure in new priority areas. We are prudently reorganizing and using the limited resources to get the job done efficiently. Embedded in this supplementary budget proposal is funding to enable these priorities to come to fruition and allow for the necessary social and economic impacts to be implemented for the benefit of the country. This budget will enable our people to feel our priorities. Additional specific policy measures to address the hardships exacerbated since Hurricane Dorian and COVID-19 include the following. Effective 1st December 2021, the 742 persons receiving retired public servants, the 742 retired public servants receiving less than $500 per month in monthly pension payment would receive an increase of $100. For the 2012 persons receiving more than $500 per month, but less than $1,000, they will receive an increase of $75. And for the 4,432 persons receiving a monthly pension of greater than $1,000, they would receive a monthly adjustment of $50 upwards. The total amount of this adjustment, Mr. Vice President, is $6.4 million. Believe it or not, Mr. Vice President, there are retired public servants who are currently receiving pensions of less than $500 per month. We have extended the National Insurance Special Unemployment Program due to expire in September 2021 to December 2021. And for the more than 17,000 persons receiving COVID unemployment support, we will provide a lump sum payment of $500 to provide a cushion for the holiday season. Increments for public servants that have been frozen are being restored, and provision is being made to clear arrears in back pay and gratuities owed to public servants. Therefore, the budget for the Ministry of the Public Service has been increased in this supplementary budget by $19,620,583. Mr. Vice President, in this supplementary budget, the government is also changing its fiscal targets to provide stability. In particular, as it relates to growth, the government is targeting potential real economic growth of at least 3% per year for the next 5 years, rather than the low growth previously experienced for decades of roughly 1.5% per year. A 3% growth level would result in lower levels of unemployment and higher revenues for government. In the area of capital expenditure, the government plans to boost capital expenditure to 3.5% of GDP on an ongoing basis as one of the key initiatives to underpin and enhance the potential growth of economic activity. The government will prioritize both direct investment in public infrastructure and greater reliance on economically and fiscally sensible public-private partnerships. It's very important, Mr. Vice President, that the government is seen to be and is a significant contributor to the economy through its capital spending. For years, our capital spending has fallen short. Capital spending meaning investments in productive activities, not only your physical infrastructure, your roads, your bridges, your docks, your airports, those things that provide support economic activity, also make it easier for the public to go about their business. That amount has been lagging in the past, Mr. Vice President, and we want to increase that amount to an average of 3.5%, which would be a significant injection into the economy. Mr. Vice President, the government has set a target of revenue to GDP of 25% by the end of this current term in office. That's important, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Vice President, because your economy might be growing, but if revenue is not accruing to the government, then the government is hamstrung in its ability to deliver goods and services to the Bahamian public, particularly services. In the area of the Revenue Enhancement Unit, Mr. Vice President, to shore up revenue, the government has reestablished a fully resourced Revenue Enhancement Unit, which we had established in our first term in office. And this unit will be supported by local and international management consultants and have as its goal broadening the tax base by minimizing tax avoidance and fraud. When fully up and running, Mr. Vice President, it is expected that the unit would account for an additional $200 million or 2% of revenue at the current levels, or 2% of GDP at the current levels. And I want to iterate, Mr. Vice President, that this is a unit that is tasked with ensuring that what is owed to the government is collected and those who can afford to pay do pay. It is not the intent that this unit would hound individuals and businesses who are still struggling in the aftermath of the pandemic and who do not have the ability to pay, but to ensure that those who have the ability to pay, who owe the government, and even those who might be having difficulty, to make sure that their arrangements are in place, that they can fulfill their obligations by way of installment plans, etc. Mr. Vice President, you would know that there were recently enacted a Public Financial Management Act, a Procurement Act came into force in September of this year, a Public Debt Management Act, and Fiscal Responsibility Act that was enacted in 2018. We will be looking in the coming months to pursue amendments to these acts to produce regulations and procedural documents and to ensure that the government is complying with the spirit and the letter of the legislation without undue delay and bureaucracy. It's important that we demonstrate that we are committed to all the tenets of fiscal responsibility and transparency, but the government must be able to pursue its objectives without undue handicap. The fiscal targets that I mentioned, Mr. Vice President, are expected to positively affect the deficit over the medium term. And so based on our initial estimates for the remainder of this budget year, our revenue is expected to increase by $92 million to $2.336 billion due to substantial increase in immigration fee revenue, the proceeds of the real property tax amnesty, and upticks in domestic economic activity ahead of original projections. So we've seen a $92 so far $1 million increase in revenue, mainly, as I said, from immigration, real property tax amnesty, and we've begun to already see some of the results of the opening of the economy. Recurrent expenditure in this supplemental budget is expected to increase by $53.3 million to $2.879 billion as compared to the original budget estimates, and that's given the reallocation across ministries and increase in social support and benefit allocations and provision for settling arrears in back pay and gratuities, as I previously mentioned. Capital expenditure will fall by $54.2 million, and that number will now stand at $316.2 million as public-private partnerships and other forms of financing are pursued, and budget provisions for capital projects are aligned with their execution schedule. So, Mr. Vice President, what that means is we looked at the capital budget, we looked at the money that was allocated in the capital budget. We realized that in some instances, not all of that money would be spent in this budget year. And so we made the adjustments. It doesn't mean that we have abandoned certain projects. It just means that we're aligning spending, we're aligning the budget provision with what we think will be spent this year. Consequently, Mr. Vice President, the deficit is expected to improve to $858.9 million, as opposed to $951 in the original budget estimates. And what that means is, as a percentage of GDP, the deficit will decrease to 7.4% versus 8.2%, as stated in the original estimate. So I say that to say, Mr. Vice President, that we are beginning to see some improvement and some, hopefully, some light at the end of the tunnel. Mr. Vice President, I'll take just a few minutes to go through some of the major changes and allocations in the budget. As we said, the Ministry of the Public Service is seeing its budget increased by just over $19 million, $19,620,583. And the bulk of that is for pensions to officials and gratuities for staff. The Office of the Prime Minister will see its budget increased by $6.7 million. And the bulk of that is the transfer, approximately $7 million transfer of the Ministry of Disaster Preparedness, those allocations transferred back to the Office of the Prime Minister. In terms of the Ministry of Finance, the Ministry of Finance budget is increasing by $31 million, and that is accounted for in bulk by the $30 million for the Special Economic Assistance Measure, which is the extension of the Unemployment Assistance Program to December, and another $6 million for the lump sum payment, and the certain other, it nets off to 31 million. There are some increases, for example, and then some decreases, $7 million decrease because the Department of Statistics is now under the Ministry of Economic Affairs. So a net increase of $31 million. The Ministry of National Security will see its budget increase by just over $2 million because of security service contracts and as well provision for the COVID-19 enforcement unit. The Ministry of Works, an increase of $7.7 million approximately, and that is accounted for in the majority of that is the transfer into the Ministry of Works of the Bahamas Public Parks and Beaches Authority from previously the Ministry of the Environment. The Department of Education will see its budget fall by $2.1 million. It's not a cut in education, Mr. Vice President, but what has happened is there were provisions made in the budget back in June 2021 that envisaged some hirings, and those hirings did not start at the beginning of the year. And so those salaries now, you don't have to have an allocation for the salaries for the whole year, because now we're almost halfway through the year. So if those persons are indeed hired, they would you only have to make provision for half year of salary. So the bulk of that was salary for contract workers, global provision for new appointments, and special employment projects. And so those persons were not brought on. There was no school. And so those salaries did not accrue. Also, a coaching allowance, no after school activities, so that amount was not spent. The Ministry of Youth, Sports and Culture saw its budget decreased by $1.9 million, Mr. Vice President, and that is accounted for by a reduction of $1.5 million for the National Junkanoo Festival. As you know, we're not having Junkanoo this year, and a $437,000 reduction in some minor reductions in various other items. The Ministry of Economic Affairs, a new ministry with a budget of $12.5 million, Mr. Vice President. Again, just over $7 million to account for the Bahamas National Statistical Institute coming over from the Ministry of Finance, an additional $4.5 million for support of small business development, and some various smaller items. And as we said, the Ministry of the Environment is seeing its budget decreased by just over $7 million, which is the removal of the Public Parks and Beaches Authority over to the Ministry of Works and the Ministry for Disaster Preparedness and Management and Reconstruction, those allocations being transferred over to the Office of the Prime Minister. In terms of the capital budget and the decreases that I mentioned earlier, the total decrease of $54 million, Mr. Vice President, in terms of the Ministry of Finance, the Ministry of Finance capital budget is falling by just under $21 million, $20.9 million. And the bulk of it has to do with IDB capital projects, subdivision infrastructure, Junkanoo development, and the National Disaster Recovery Project, which was transferred to the Office of the Prime Minister. And in terms of, again, IDB capital projects, Mr. Speaker, as you may know, we have a portfolio of loans with the Inter-American Development Bank that are at various stages of implementation. And so what we did was go through and make a determination as to how much of that money that had been allocated will actually be spent this year, and hence the reduction. It does not mean that we are abandoning the projects or that we're not committed to the projects. Some like the digitization project, the health project, the airport project, the citizen security and justice project, some project with some very good outcomes. But unfortunately, some delays in execution, which we are reflecting, but in no way are we abandoning any of it, particularly projects such as digitization and the airports for the Family Islands, citizen justice, the health project, very good projects, public financial management. It's just, and I can say that we have been meeting with the IDB, talking about the portfolio and how we can improve the implementation so that we can get those benefits. And so just an adjustment to reflect how much can actually be spent this year. And hopefully we can move forward with those, Mr. Deputy, because some of them, not only predate this current administration, predate the immediate prior administration. And, we have had some input in what right, in some of the projects that we have. So again, good projects that endure, across administrations. Again, the Ministry of Work, similar, their budget down by 7.8 to reflect a reduction in one of the IDB projects that was under the Ministry of Works. Ministry of Health and Wellness, in terms of their capital budget, a decrease of $2.5 million. Again, Mr. Deputy, aligning what we can actually spend this year. And the Ministry of Disaster Preparedness, Management and Reconstruction, minus $4.1 million. Various items in that minor capital projects, hurricane precautions, which have been transferred to head number 21, which is Ministry of Finance. So, Mr. Vice President, all in all, to sum it up, we are aligning some of the resources that have been allocated to better reflect our priorities. Signs are pointing to an improving economy, and we are hopeful. We remain cautiously optimistic that we have seen the worst of the pandemic, but we know that we must remain vigilant in our health precautions and disciplined in our fiscal management. We're not out of the woods yet. And Omicron has shown us that with its appearance and the reaction to it. And I smiled because, the reaction has been very acute, Mr. yeah, possibly hysterical. Mm-hmm. But, even in that hysterical reaction, that has implications for the economy. Mm-hmm. And so we must be careful. We're not out of the woods. So we must remain vigilant in our health precautions and in our management of our resources. Mm-hmm. We must remain disciplined because, we're not out of the woods. It's not over. Against the backdrop, Mr. Vice President, of containing expenditure and boosting revenue, we're reminded that the country's debt has accelerated to just over 100% of the GDP, a level that is too high for a nation like ours, far too high. To plan for the strategic and targeted decline of the national debt burden, we are crafting a debt management strategy that will guide our borrowing and service our obligations going forward. Mr. Speaker, prophetic, Mr. Vice President, in the last 2.5 months, we've spent a lot of time speaking with banks and creditors and rating agencies and the IMF, the World Bank, the IDB, all of them, talking about our debt, amongst other things, but our debt, the fact that the debt has gone over 100%, but reiterating that the government of the Bahamas has never defaulted on any of its obligations. We've never missed a payment. We've never rescheduled any debt in terms of not being able to pay and then so having to make changes. And that is a record that we're proud of. That is a record that we intend to have continue into the future. But we recognize that over the last, because of the pandemic and the hurricane and the slow growth of the economy, our debt has gone up too high. We need to rebuild what they call headroom so that we can have some space. Should we have another event, we can have space to still be able to borrow money, access credit in order to run the country. And this is a matter that has exercised the Bahamian public. The Bahamian public is very aware of it and very concerned about it. And we have created a private sector debt advisory committee to assist us with this effort to identify different types of financing, including green financing that provides more favorable terms. And we're working on that strategy. And so the idea is to have individuals from the private sector. The committee is chaired by the Honorable James Smith, former Minister of State for Finance, former Governor of the Central Bank, and some local financial luminaries, accomplished professionals who will be chiming in. And because they're involved in financial services every day, they know, the latest trends in the industry and can give advice to the government, which we then have our public servants and our debt management unit within the Ministry of Finance put together to come up with the best possible outcome. As you know, Mr. Vice President, we were downgraded by Moody's in September 2021 and by Standard & Poor's in November. And they all spoke to this elevated level of debt and low growth. And so these are things that we must address. Improve the rate of growth of the economy, and that will help us address our elevated debt level. And if there was any good news in that whole downgrade saga, Mr. Vice President, it is that it is recognized that our economy is poised for more growth, and that should relieve some pressure on the government. And so that's a snapshot of the supplementary budget, Mr. Vice President, on the recurrent side and on the capital side. Also before us, Mr. Vice President, is the Value-Added Tax Amendment Bill 2021. And the most impactful and the most discussed provision of this bill before us is the reduction of the VAT rate from 12% to 10%. This reduction, Mr. Vice President, is in fulfillment of a commitment made in the PLP Economic Plan published in March 2021 and subsequently included in our Blueprint for Change. Initially, it was a commitment to reduce VAT from 12% to 10% and reassess after 12 months. We have since removed that 12-month provision and are committed to a VAT rate of 10% across the board, Mr. Vice President. We believe that the VAT cut will have a positive effect on spending, and we know it will result in savings for consumers. Everything that we currently pay 12% VAT on, we will now pay 10% after the passage of these bills, Mr. Speaker. Now, Mr. Vice President, concerns have been raised about the elimination of the zero rating on breadbasket items and a limited number of other items that were zero rated when the amendments were made in 2018. Those items were made VAT-free at the time that VAT was raised from 7.5% to 12% in the 2018 budget. Just want to say, just to be clear, Mr. Vice President, in order to have those items in the breadbasket and a few other items zero rated, the administration at the time increased the VAT on everything else, goods and services, from 7.5% to 12%. So in order to make grits, rice, flour, tomato paste, soap, powdered detergent, mustard, mayonnaise, milk, flour, cooking oil, corned beef, canned fish, cheese, butter, bread, baby formula, baby food, and baby cereal VAT-free.
I have to take a point of order.
Yeah.
The chair recognizes Senator the Honorable Darren Henfield.
Thank you, Mr. Vice. I was sitting here and saying the Minister for Economic Affairs is so diplomatic and gracious and understanding of where we are. Just to increase VAT, we did it to bring relief, we thought, in a struggling economy to middle and low income families who needed the assistance at the time. And so to say we did that just for grits and flour and rice, and I think that's patently unfair. And I think the minister recognizes that as well.
No, it's not. I don't think it's unfair, Mr. Vice President. I have another point which I think will make everything come together. In the last administration, the Minister of Finance made a point that he was pursuing a balanced budget. And I think that a part of his pursuit of the balanced budget was to raise the rate. And I know that the previous administration in there, I think it was the manifesto before the 2017 election, made a commitment to remove the VAT on those items. And I remember, Mr. Vice President, watching the 2018 budget debate and listening to the Minister of Finance, and he was listing off the things that would no longer attract VAT. He said, we're taking VAT off of this, taking VAT off of that. And I'm sitting there watching, and I'm like, boy, if they do that, I mean, in my mind, boy, we're in trouble. I said, we're in trouble because if they can do all of that, I mean, they're going to be in for a long time. And then the minister said, in order to do this, we will ask you to consider raising VAT to 12%. I think what we're saying, Mr. Vice President, is this. Our philosophy is one rate at a lower rate with minimal exemption. That was informed by advice. The previous administration had a differing view where they felt that they could bring this relief, but in order to do that, there had to be a higher rate. And I think the objective of that was more revenue, as well as accounting for what the VAT came off of. But so when I say in order to make these things, I want to just make the point that you can do two things. In countries where they have VAT-free items, their rate tends to be higher. And so in some countries, they have several rates of VAT. They might have 0 on food and medicine and X amount on furniture, and restaurant meals might be higher, and airline travel might be, or hotel stays might be even higher. So they have differing rates. VAT on alcohol might be extremely high. And it's a way that they, the syntax, and it's a way that they try to allocate. But I just want to say our belief, Mr. Vice President, is that number one, we should have a low rate as possible. We should have one rate. We should have minimal exemptions. And for those who are most vulnerable or who might be most impacted, we give a direct assistance. That is the advice that we have. And so when I say, in order to make grits, rice, flour, tomato paste, soap, powder, detergent, mustard, mayonnaise, milk, cooking oil, corned beef, canned fish, cheese, butter, bread, baby formula, baby food, and baby cereal battery, along with some sanitary items. What I'm saying, Mr. Speaker, that Mr. Vice President, that in order to do that, you had to change the VAT rate because you cannot just go in and take those things out and leave it at a low rate. And so in order to take VAT off of those, VAT had to be increased on, for example, in the food store, chicken, pork chop, turkey wing, ribs, lamb chop, ham, salt beef, peas, bean, sausages, egg, hot dog, tomatoes, onion, cabbage, Irish potato, sweet potato, carrots, broccoli, mixed vegetable, corn, lettuce, celery, macaroni, spaghetti, noodles, sugar, cornflakes, oatmeal, tea bag, coffee, Milo, sweet pepper, soda, juice, Gatorade, Vitamalt, ice cream, cookies, chips, lime juice, salt, seasoning, foil paper, sandwich bag, garbage bag, Joy, Ajax, pot scrubber, flip, chicken snack, count snack, meal deal, lotion, shampoo, shoes, tennis, socks, shirt, pants. When you go to the gas station, at the hardware store, at the restaurant, medical insurance, you go to the fabric store, the home store, commercial rent, everything. So my point in listing all of those, Mr. Deputy, is, Mr. Vice President, is that when you try to bring relief by exempting certain things, and then you have to raise the rate on other things, inevitably people are paying more for those things. And even though they might get a saving on the items that you make VAT free, inevitably by raising the rate, they pay more on everything else. And furthermore, Mr. Speaker, the rate has to be high. And let me say this, Mr. Speaker, and I say this over and over, it's a sensitive topic. It's a topic that we agonized over. Remember when we first did it, and when we came back and we said, okay, if we're going to go to 10, we have to go back to minimal exemptions. We have to bring the relief that we can. But it's sensitive because, people consume these things. And you don't want to be in a position where you're advocating that those who need help go to social service because people have pride and they have dignity and they don't want to go. And so we balance that, all of those concerns with what is best practice. And again, you don't want to appear incentive by talking about studies and research and best practice when we're talking about food. But our view, for example, is, Mr. Deputy, that if you put an exemption on rice, for example, not only are you giving the single householder a break, so to speak, but you're also giving it to the restaurants and everybody else and the high-income people who consume the same thing. And so how do we do that? And our advice is the best way is to give a direct cash assistance, Mr. Speaker. And so we believe that is better, it's more effective to have a lower rate with minimal exemptions, and for those vulnerable in our society, that they be given a direct cash assistance. And as I said, Mr. Speaker, if we try to give relief to lower income households by making an item VAT free, you're giving that same relief to the high income households and businesses that do not need, in some cases, they come right out and tell you they don't want the relief. Our belief is the best policy is to keep a flat, low rate and provide direct assistance. Again, it's an emotional issue, and it's a real issue, not just emotional, and we in no way minimize it. But again, the best policy for the effectiveness of assistance and the effectiveness of the tax system and to strengthen government revenue so that government will have the resources to provide the services to the public is the policy that we are pursuing with these amendments, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Vice President. And this is backed by academic study, the opinions of professionals over the past few weeks. You've seen anywhere from the governor of the central bank to the chairman of the Accounting Association, the past chairman of the Bankers Association, endorsed this policy. And it is demonstrated, Mr. Deputy. If you look at the household expenditure survey of 2013, it's dated, but we believe it's still relevant. A low-income household spends about $723 per year on food. That's at the lowest 10%. The highest 10% they spend at about $2,650. And so if you're giving exemptions on those items, you're giving it not only to the low income, the high income who don't need it. And so again, the best way, keep it flat and provide direct assistance. It makes it more efficient, Mr. Vice President, because we have information that our effectiveness went from about 99% down to 84% after we've begun to do the exemptions. You would recall that the VAT rate was increased by 60% in 2018, but the revenue only went up by 28%. So it was not, you didn't get the full 60% effect. And so we think, again, that we are on the right track, Mr. Speaker. And according to studies conducted by the University of the Bahamas and the Ministry of Finance, a reduction of VAT from 12% to 10% alongside a permanent elimination of zero-rated categories will allow the government to provide immediate tax relief, induce minimal contraction in GDP, and likely improve tax revenue collection. And it is important as well, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Vice President, that in pursuing these amendments that we will also be pursuing a reintroduction of the RISE program to provide direct assistance by way of the debit card. And so our goal is an efficient, equitable VAT with direct relief to the most vulnerable. And we look forward to the debate, Mr. Vice President, because as I said, there are alternative views on this, but we believe that this is the best policy to pursue. And so, Mr. Vice President, with those words, I move for second reading of the Supplementary Appropriation 2021-2022 Recurrent Account Expenses Bill 2021.
Is there a seconder? The chair recognizes Senator the Honorable Quintin Lightbourne.
Mr. Vice President, I stand here this morning to make my second contribution in these honorable chambers. I am indeed honored to second the 2021-2022 Supplementary Budget and Value-Added Tax Amendment Bill. This bill will lay the foundation for the launch of a new vision and new direction for our beloved country. The supplementary budget is the first budget of this administration as we begin to address the immediate needs to get our economy up and running again. This budget will set the foundation for our plans towards fiscal recovery and economic growth that our country so badly needs. Mr. Vice President, the main goals of this budget are: 1, provide relief for Bahamians. 2, reallocate funding to match ministerial portfolios for the government. And thirdly, provide funding for critical expenditures that were neglected by the previous administration. With that said, this administration also understands the need to reduce the level of government borrowing. The national debt now stands at a whopping $8.5 billion due to record levels of borrowing that my generation will be left to deal with. The previous administration in May of this year borrowed $986,892,690.15. In 1 year alone, the previous administration borrowed close to $1 billion. And the question many Bahamians may ask, where is it? We didn't see it, we couldn't feel it, and we definitely didn't touch it.
Chair recognizes Senator the Honorable Darren Henfield.
Point of order, Mr. Vice. The senator might be fully aware that in the last perhaps 2 years, the Bahamas has been up under the most extreme economic stress in the modern history of this country. We can stand here and recount where the funding went, social assistance, COVID response.
What is the point of order?
The point of order is that the member is misleading by saying that you cannot see where the funding went. That is misleading. And it's also improper imputations that perhaps the monies were borrowed, almost $1 billion to his account, and went somewhere that you can't see. Some things you can't see, taste, and touch. You can't see, taste, and touch the monies that went into foods for families in distress. You can't see, taste, and touch monies that went into social support and assistance. All right? So I just want the senator to be careful with that type of rhetoric.
Mr. Vice President, as I continue my contribution, I'll address these concerns. They will say that it was spent on disaster recovery and on the pandemic. But they had 3 budget cycles prior to Dorian, and we still didn't feel or see the fiscal expertise. This New Day government will fulfill our campaign promises. We promised that we would end the emergency orders, and we did it. We promised that we would roll out free COVID-19 testing, and we've done that in North Eleuthera, the Berry Islands, and Inagua. This is only the beginning for free testing, and it will be soon introduced nationwide. Now, here we are again, in this upper house, on the verge of making another campaign promise a reality by reducing VAT from 12% to 10%. Mr. Vice President, the former administration, during its first budget in 2017, reduced taxes on aircrafts, in particular helicopters. They also reduced taxes on sea vessels, salmon, and guess what? Caviar. Exactly. Who were they helping when they reduced the tax on caviar? We all know who. It is abundantly clear that the intention wasn't for the average Bahamian, but for a select few. Then again, in 2018, the previous administration increased VAT by 60%, despite global economic growth and prosperity at that time. At that time, they decided to tax the Bahamian people even more, and then boasted about being fiscally responsible, as if raising taxes is the only way to address the government's fiscal situation. The then opposition warned them that this move would negatively impact the economy and curtail spending at a time when we should be capitalizing on the strength of the economy. 3 years later, we have seen a $2 billion decrease in consumer spending, representing a 34% reduction since the increase of VAT. Mr. Vice President, the difference between the two administrations is like a story of 2 homes. One is a nice, pretty 2-story house, pretty picket fence, carport, and a pool. But when you walk inside that house, the cupboards are bare. No furniture, the lights are off, and the misery level index in that house is unbearable. The other, a 1-story home, no pretty picket fence, no carport, no pool. But the cupboard is filled to the brim. The people are happy and the family go to bed each night. I ask of you all in here, which home would you rather live in? I know. I give this example because the previous administration wanted most of us to believe that the country's finances were in order from the outside, just like that fancy home. But since September 16, 2021, we discovered that it was all an illusion. In actuality, the cupboards were bare and the Bahamian people were indeed suffering. It is time for the Davis administration to fill the cupboards once again. Mr. Vice President, in crafting this budget, this administration is committed to striking the balance between restoring the fiscal health of this nation while also addressing the harsh reality which many Bahamians are living through each day. These are some serious times, but there's now a government in place that doesn't forget about the small man and woman when it makes its decisions. We will continue to strike this balance because it's the only way that Bahamians can thrive as we fight through this recovery period. As a financial professional, I seldom and sometimes shook my head in disbelief at how the management of our country's finances were done. This supplementary budget is the first step towards fixing the damage right away. We will be establishing a private sector debt advisory committee, which will consist of some of the brightest financial minds in our country. They will spearhead and finalize plans for effective debt management and debt reduction for our nation. At the same time, we will be setting up a revenue policy committee comprised of top private and public sector economists that will work towards lowering the goals and bringing us to a 25% revenue to GDP ratio by the end of our 5-year term. Simultaneously, while working towards lowering the national debt and increasing overall revenues. We are reducing VAT from 12% to 10% to provide savings at the register for Bahamians. This will be felt with the purchase of every good and service. The most recent IMF technical report stated that if the government didn't change its VAT structure, VAT would have been raised to 15%. Could you imagine the impact that would have had on our Bahamian people? There is no way this New Day government would have raised VAT to 15% while keeping the existing VAT exemptions and leaving in place the scenario when the government was paying for wealthy foreign companies. Reducing VAT to 10% will align our country with international best practices. The IMF report also stated that to truly help the vulnerable in our nation, you must provide direct relief instead of just placing zero-rate items on selected items. Mr. Vice President, I expect real, substantive discourse on the supplementary budget and VAT amendment bill in this upper chamber. The Bahamian people are tired of the theatrics and political rhetoric and want to feel and see real change in our nation. During the debate in this House, I encouraged the side opposite to talk about the increase in pension payments for retirees, the $500 lump sum payments to unemployed Bahamians that they will be receiving along with their regular scheduled payments. Talk about the extension of the unemployment benefits program. I encourage them to give their fair and honest assessment on the return of the annual increments for civil servants. Don't just choose to talk about the one or two issues that you think may give you some political mileage. As you give your assessment, I challenge you not to oppose for opposition's sake, but to be fair in your assessments and debate. When I say that this present administration is a government for all Bahamians and not a select few, I'm simply stating the facts. It is of the core value of this administration and something that we strive for each and every day. In this supplementary budget, you can see where our focus is. We are all about striking a balance in favor of the Bahamian people. Next up is the Revenue Enhancement Unit, which will be fully resourced and equipped to do its work in collecting taxes and identifying incidents of tax avoidance and fraud. I am making a clarion call to all and any Bahamian or persons residing in the Bahamas to pay your outstanding tax bills to ensure that we get our country in order. This government will see that taxes are applied fairly and not just one-sided. As you are aware that there are millions of dollars out there, and our Revenue Enhancement Unit is prepared and will be prepared to collect it. To fix the current situation, we must not allow existing levels of non-compliance to stand. The irony in all of this is that lower income citizens are shouldered a major part of the tax burden. And because they typically pay taxes via their consumption, they are not typically the ones avoiding paying their taxes. Many initiatives will come into place because of the supplementary budget, and the Bahamas Development Bank will be one of the institutions leading the charge. More emphasis will be targeted toward the development of businesses and strengthening relationships between the Small Business Development Center and BDB. The key objective here is synergy, so that every agency is playing the part that it is suited to do and not a duplication of efforts. The Bahamas Development Bank will once again be the government's primary provider for promoting industrial, agricultural, and commercial development. It will also facilitate participation in approved enterprises while stimulating and enhancing the economy and providing employment opportunities for so many Bahamians. We will be leveraging new technologies and new skill sets as we invest in the blue, green, and orange economies. In the first quarter of the year, I will bring further details on how the BDB will empower Bahamian entrepreneurs on their path to successful businesses. This New Day government and the Bahamas Development Bank will continue to work along with the U.S. Embassy as we seek to promote gender equality. The BDB intends to increase the number of women entrepreneurs in the Bahamas through the Academy of Entrepreneurs Microloan Program. Investing in women is very important to this government, but it's also a good business practice as diverse companies perform better and therefore aid in the economic diversification and expansion of our nation's economy. Women are roughly half of this country's population, and to have a healthy country, we must ensure that our women are empowered, especially in any areas or sectors where they're typically underrepresented. When we say that the PLP is here to build a more fair and equitable society for everyone, we mean it. The AWE program that I spoke about will provide loans of up to $15,000 for women who have graduated from the program. The Bahamas Development Bank plans to set aside $150,000 for the 2021 graduating class. This is just the initial investment in what we expect to be a long-term investment in women entrepreneurs. The supplementary budget is without a doubt a bold step in the right direction. Despite all that we are doing, we have actually reduced the capital expenditure budget by $54.2 million. This new gay government is showing fiscal responsibility by cutting back on huge consultancy services in the Department of Education and the Ministry of Tourism, Investments, and Aviation. In the case of education, we are also removing inactive people from the payroll, a trimming exercise that was long overdue and does not impact the successful operation of schools. We know that business and spending as usual will not be able to be sustained in our present economy. All progress moving forward must be sustained and balanced. Sometimes this requires trade-offs and compromises. But unlike the previous administration, we won't sell any dreams. Not like the one thousands of Bahamians and thousands of Bahamian professionals thought about when it came to home ownership. That is absolutely wrong. Becoming a homeowner in this country right now is a very difficult task. Thousands of Bahamians had their faith in the government to deliver on opportunities as presented to them and were heartbroken when they learned that some of these stuff were only election ploys, that groundwork was not done. This government is putting together a comprehensive plan, complete with a topography study and extensive title searches of all land designated for homes provided by the government. Many of my peers were filled with joy about the possibility of owning a home in a nice area for below market price, but they were hoodwinked and denied. This administration will deliver in a real way regarding home and ownership. The Minister of Transport and Housing has already announced numerous housing developments throughout the Bahamas. There is even a rent-to-own program being considered for those who cannot afford a down payment or qualify for a traditional mortgage. This is real innovation at work. I'm sure many Bahamians are waiting with bated breath on these details. We are not here to sell dreams, but we can ensure that the people of the Bahamas, that home ownership is on the horizon. The social revolution was accomplished by our forefathers. It is now our time to create the economic revolution for all Bahamians. The general mood and feeling right now in this country is one of optimism and hope. Some may say, just ask the road. Many millennials feel as if, though, that now they have a voice and a seat at the decision-making table for this New Day government. I assure you that they won't be disappointed. This administration will demonstrate compassion by listening to the people and showing love and respect to all Bahamians. The task ahead of us is great, but through competent, compassionate leadership, we will restore, recover, and revitalize the Bahamian economy. The first budget will help to be stabilizing our country's finances and providing immediate relief for Bahamians. As I take my seat, Mr. Vice President, I leave you all with Proverbs chapter 3, verse 27. And I quote, "Do not withhold good from those for whom it is due, when it is in your power to act." This New Day government will not hinder the potential for economic growth and empowerment for any Bahamian. This supplementary budget is a testament to that scripture. It is indeed an honor and privilege that I stand here and second the bill on the 2021-2022 supplementary budget and value-added tax amendment. God bless the Commonwealth of the Bahamas.
It has been moved and seconded that the following bills be read a second time and committed. A bill for an act for the appropriation of further diverse sums of money for and towards deferring the expenses of the government of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas during the fiscal year commencing 1st July 2021 and ending 30th June 2022. A bill for an act for the reduction in the appropriation of diverse sums of money for and towards deferring the capital expenses of the government of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas during the fiscal year commencing 1st July 2021 and ending 30th June 2022, and a bill for an act to amend the value-added tax. As many, the chair recognizes Senator the Honorable Reuben Reming.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. Rise by the grace of God and good of our Commonwealth to make my contribution to this debate. I am always minded of the biblical saying where it says, "Be good to strangers because you never know when you entertain the angels." And I always stand in awe of experience. I respect my elders. I honor their legacy. I respect them not out of perfection, but because of the things they went through. I understand that in imperfection, you find some of the best lessons. That is why I respect all of our colleagues here around the table, and also the energy of Honorable Quentin Lightburn. And I stand because I remember when we first came to this house, I think it was established unofficially, but it is true that the senior man in this house is the Honorable Michael Alkitis. And he had served through many administrations. And when it comes to VAT and finances, even if I disagree, I confess that I honorably and respectfully listen to him because his knowledge far exceeds mine. But I do understand that this also is politics, and therein where the difference lies. My advice to all of us would be that when you have such a senior man starting off a debate and he makes certain statements, it is prudent for us where best as possible to follow the lead. Because in explaining the deficits and the struggle, he clearly outlined, and he laid no blame because he understood exactly what we went through as a nation and a country. So I would chalk up the energy of Senator Quentin to that millennial energy, but I advise him to pay attention to the rooted wisdom of the senior man. Because the senior man does understand that the devil is in the details and truth is irrefutable. And through study of records and numbers that could be juggled, but they don't lie, you could find the facts. But I stand here today to remind him, just as Proverbs says, that Luke chapter 14 and 28 says, "For which of you intend to build a tower, sitteth not down first and count the cost, whether he has sufficient to finish it. Least happily after he had laid the foundation and is not able to finish it, all that behold, it began to mock him, saying, this man began to build and was not able to finish. Everyone in here, and I take a quote from our leader, Michael Pintard, none of us may have a monopoly on love for the Bahamian people. We may take a different approach to it, but my God will judge me if I point a finger at any one of you and say you do not love the Commonwealth of the Bahamas and you do not seek the best for the Bahamian people. As parents, sometimes we, in trying to do the best for our kids, sometimes we make errors, we make mistakes. My parents have done that numerous of times. But I cannot point a finger and say they don't love. I don't point a finger at this administration and said you don't love and they attend. That's why, despite my concerns about the VAT legislation amendment, all of us want to see anything that could reduce the burdens of our Bahamian people. And we'll support that. And so as the chaplain said, I too must adopt the Serenity Prayer facing certain realities. Y'all in the government, you got the numbers and this can pass anyway. And it says that I must accept the things that I cannot change and I must to change the things that I can. And other than that, I got to know the difference. I can't change this. But I could remind you of certain things and I could represent certain facts that are very, very important. First of all, to Senator Quinton, I had the pleasure to listen to our financial secretary, Simon Wilson. He was on Jones and Co last night. And it's interesting that he was there during the last administration, and Mr. Alcides. And I respect him with that because he was at the vanguard, the point of that. It fell under the leader but we all know that where the word come, and he followed it and he brought it. He's the author of it in this country. And we understand the role of Simon Wilson during the time of that administration, and he's back in again right now. And unlike you, Mr. Wilson, who I still have to respect, because he's a proven man, said as relate last night to the revenue, that the revenue of this country, and I'm quoting him, is very robust. I ain't gonna run over nothing else, you know. You just got here. You didn't get here in 2016 because you can get sworn in until after. So basically, we're still running on the momentum of the F&M government. Everything that you're attempting to do, including the reduction in VAT, and I will stand to be corrected by Mr. Alcides respectfully, could not have been envisioned even with your best intention had not this statement been true that the current revenue and projection of this country is sufficiently robust for these amendments and adjustments to be made and to be had. That is the short of it. You know, the thing about it is, you know, and I got, because God rolled me over and I just looked and started to see certain things. And I saw Simon, I said, man, I got to listen to this man because I respect him so much. We also got to remember that in this quarter, the new budget just got passed in July. In this first quarter, we can talk about projections now because see, you read scripture, don't do that in here, man. And so we can talk about how the man build we can talk about how the man build that was a negative, man. That was a negative. We talk about how a man build a house. Remember the preamble, we a Christian nation. How a man build a house. Let's talk about projections. All right? Kwesi Thompson, our former Minister of Finance. And I can give you one line out of his speech because I listened to it. Our first quarter, we just wrapping up our first quarter, aren't we? Our first quarter projection after this last budget that we passed. He said over the same period last year, this time, in every revenue area, the Bahamas increased by over 90%. I look at that and I thought that was strange until I realized he said over last year. I thought he said revenue. And I read it and I said, hold on. over last year's performance. This same time last year, our revenue in almost every revenue category has increased by 90%. So much so that you walk into a surplus of $90 million over our projection. See, we don't have to run about everything else, because see, let me show you something. I agree with my leader, Michael Pintard. Listen, we don't want you all to fail. Listen, we want government, but we don't want you to fail because we understand if you jack up over these 5 years, you hurt us all. Because we all have a monopoly in the success of this country. Not a monopoly in love, because we all do. But we own the success of this country. So we want you to do it right until decision time comes again. So now we're looking at it doesn't matter what you say, the fact is in your face. See, it doesn't matter how much a runner trip up during the race, It's a matter who crossed that line. When the line was crossed in September, the revenue was exceedingly abundantly above and beyond what y'all could imagine or think. Because the reality is, Simon Wilson, who just came back in, and he said it himself, 3 months, let's talk truth. 3 months when we came in, we moved Simon Wilson out of finance. He came back in immediately after with this administration. That is true. So when he came back in, his snapshot is, and I said it again, he said it on Jones & Co., and he said a couple of things that caused me to raise his mind. Let me just read them because I want you to say point of order. Revenue is very robust. You sat here and boast about, almost like try to say, Moses, we let our people go with the COVID orders. Is there point of order?
Yes, sir. Okay. Point of order, Mr. Vice President.
Chair recognizes Senator Lightbourne.
The Honorable Senator is saying or has this facts that they're so robust from a TV show, right? TV show.
Oh, really?
Listen, hold on. I asked him to please tell me why there's such robust, why was there a need to borrow $1 billion that you sat there and approved? Tell me why.
Again, Bible says, trust in the Lord with all thy heart and lean not to your own understanding. Mr. Alcides is sitting right next to you. Before you stand on the point of order of that, just lean over to your colleagues, say, bro.
I want you to
Because no, the reality, why we had to borrow $1 billion?
Yeah.
You said in your thing, you said in your same statement that you raised saying, why didn't you answer this question? Try to write them down. Why you didn't give them the annual increment? You know why? Because the people would rather be paid a salary while they were home during COVID than to worry about a small fraction. Listen here, this is about taking the beam out of your eye before you look and try to take a speck out, That increment was a speck to keeping every civil servant paid. When we had lost, when our economy and the country revenue dropped by 70% during COVID, it is not your fault. I'm not blaming you. Mr. Alcides did not blame anyone for the devastation. He stood up and he said, you know what? Where we are now, this is where we're going. That's why I respect that. Because he understood. And in the midst of that, why do you borrow? You see what I'm saying? Then you ask, why don't you ask them about the lump sum? Why don't you ask for the increment? You say, why did you say increment but civil servant? When you ask for the pensioners, and you're talking about the $500 you do with the pensioners. Listen here. Under national insurance, people will qualify for one, Mr. President, one payment of unemployment benefit. Am I correct? How many times over and over again we keep paying unemployment benefit? I think we did almost 4 times, and now you're doing another wave of it. That's money going directly to people during the pandemic, and you worry about where the money's going. Listen, what I want to say is very simple, Again, and this is respectfully because we have to wrap this budget up today. Just talk to Mr. Alcides, Just talk. Talk to Senator, the Honorable Michael Alcides, Mr. Vice President, because that is just a red herring that you better than that. I'll leave it like that. And to say about a TV show, guess what? Everybody watching us now, it's a TV show. You understand? So should they flippantly take the utterance of anyone in this room because they saw it on TV? Again, I quote, who said it? The financial secretary of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas, and I say this respectfully, me nor you better than him with numbers.
Senator, please address the chair.
Mr. President.
Thank you.
I think, I don't advise you. None of us are better than our financial secretary. And knowing that, he is not only committed to this country, he's committed to this administration. So he has no reason to lie. You understand? He is the trusted person by this administration. So don't bring his quote into disrepute, because I trust it as well. You know, but it did say some things that caused me to wonder, because one of the things he says, that the reductions, this is a quote, will also lower the cost of high value purchases. You talk about caviar, but this is with the financial service. This is with Mr. Vice President. This is what Simon Wilson said on Jones and Crow last night. He said the reduction will lower the cost of high value purchases. I want to leave that there because we need to stop running on, but who's the wealthy person, who's the this, who's the that? Because as far as I'm concerned, our overall national taxation system has never been one that has been advantageous to the poor as opposed to the rich. Duty. The rich don't pay duty. When they buy something, they put it up and charge it back to you, and they make the money back and pay it back out. So indirectly, apart from probably personal consumption, they don't really pay duty. The people who sell cars, you think they pay the duty? You pay the duty. They get their profit and go free and clear. You when you go to the food store or anywhere else and you pay VAT on that grocery, you think the rich man pay VAT? He pay what you make. What you pay it back, he pass it on. We have hotels in this country got favorite island nation status. They can get anything duty-free across the board because we've been happy with jobs. But where are we going to have a class of people that have that same favorite nation status? And I don't mean just by words, you know. I mean in deeds. The bread basket item was started in 1971, long before the PLP there for them. Somebody had the vision that we should have a type of city of refuge for the poor in the midst of our taxation system. You catch what I'm saying? A little bubble. Where you say, Freddie got a little meal here somewhere that no matter how the tax fluttered, you know, this is going to be the insulating factor. This is almost like when the Bible speaks about the gleaners who glean on the side of the wheat harvest and say, don't touch them. Let them glean on the side. You take everything in the middle, but let them glean on the side. And this is the second time that VAT has hit the bread basket items, then was taken off, then hit it again. It has nothing to do with what it does in the greater thing, because quite frankly, if you look at the cost of real estate in this country, and you see the 2% reduction on high-end, over $2 million real estate, that probably would compensate for a lot of those things. And I said probably again because I always yield to the financial expert, but it's a lot of money. A lot of money and over $2 million real estate transactions. I understand the rising tides lift all boats, but in the midst of that, there are life preservers in the boat to protect some. So we should at least, I would recommend, that we should treat the bread basket as a sanctuary. And if you want to tax anything in the bread basket, take it out, tax it. But we should find a way to populate the bread basket with those same cushion, because all of us know hard times come for anybody. I don't think, although it is a good and reasonable and considered, I don't want to use the word excuse, thought that yes, there are chefs who may use the rice and who also benefit from it. But at the same token, you got to realize, if you are trying to target a class of individuals, then let's just do that. Medication, we are still in a health crisis right now. The worst thing we can do is Mr. Vice President, is to increase the taxation on medications that would have been exempt. I remember Dr. Dwayne Sands stood up in the House Assembly and his contribution as related to COVID. And he was saying that, and you know, us of African descent are very susceptible to communicable and non-communicable diseases. The high blood pressures, the different type things that is common to us because of our dietary situation and everything else. But that is a magnet for the COVID. Now we have a new variant out there that has people panicking. And yet we have situations whereas with these medications, yes, I admit, because Samuel Wilson said it, that the government is the larger procurer of medicines, of purchase of medicines in the country. But just because the government is the largest purchaser of medicine, we're still trying to catch the few. We're still trying to catch those We still trying to catch those who someday, one day, can end up in the same situation. Sometimes, and I pray all of us don't have to go through it in order to empathize with people in their positions. I sit back and sometimes, and I remember when my wife had cancer and we had to battle through that. I've been to social services, you know. I've been to social services. When you saw the amount of money they was charging for the radiation treatment, you couldn't sustain that. You wouldn't know what I had to do or where I had to stoop to get past that situation. Some things is not only just a business of economic, it's a position of conscience, Mr. Vice President. Some things we should not trust. I would recommend to this government, not as a chastisement, because I'm asking for them to help, to consider, we should all consider creating and looking at the bread basket as an institution, as a refuge, where we do place in it things that if the worst happen, this is the best minimum that the government can guarantee to ensure that you have a meal. And that is my perspective on it. And that is my discomfort with this whole thing. But sure, I am happy with anything we can do that can lower any burden on anyone, because guess what? All of us in the same boat. Anyone in here, Mr. Vice President, don't pay VAT? When VAT was raised, it was raised on me too. When it lowered, be lowered on me too. But I do know hard times always come. And there should be some reconsideration soon. And also, as the projection was said, yes, there was a recommendation about it. And again, there's a lot of things that were said as in the reports. We always take segments out of reports and we the part that we want. But the report also have warnings. And I'll let my colleagues also elaborate on some of those things. And let me give you another reason why I'm concerned about protections. Remember what I said. Chiefly in the financial operation of this country, we have, and I'm saying this respectfully, just factfully, we have right back at the helm, apart from our Prime Minister, current Prime Minister. We have Mr. Simon Wilson, and we have our honorable member here back at the helm in finance. And trust me with all my heart, this is not no disrespect. I wish them good. I need them to do good. Because we're not out of this woods of COVID-19 right now. That's why I'm cautious of any over-optimistic projection when we don't know what's going to happen next year. You see what they did to Africa? They shut down everything going to Africa because Africa was the first nation who acknowledged the new variant and share all the data. But that wasn't the first country that had it. They didn't do it to them other European countries, but they did it to Africa. Yet, who was it? Was it the National Health Body acknowledged and commended Africa for being so mature and bringing out the data quickly, but other countries had it and kept it under wraps. We are not safe in this environment. But let's talk about projection. I told you our projection that has brought us to the point where the financial secretary said our revenue is very robust. But let's look at the history of this whole thing. What has me concerned? Not about the ideas, not about wanting to help people, but the reality, the viability of the new projection going forward. I'm only confident because for the most part, they're still going with the budget that we have, that we presented in July. Because here it is now. In 2013, all right, it was projected that the economy will grow by 2.7%. In 2013, that's under the former administration. Same financial persons. The economy shrunk by 0.4%. In 2014, it was projected it'll go by 2.3%. Guess what we end up with? We end up with negative 0.1%. In 2015, it was projected that it will grow by 2.3%. We had a 1% growth. In 2016, it was projected that the economy would only grow by 0.5%. We shrank by 0.17%. Then in 2017, after 7 months of election spending, which was an additional $600 million by the previous administration, the FNM administration came in. Now you start to see how this money started to roll. Now you start to see why things had to pick up. I mentioned the downgrades that was following bam, 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 you know. I know I mentioned the downgrades that back to back, back to back, back. Despite the brilliance of the financial people that we had then and we have now. So don't blame me when I look at Luke and say, we got to consider this house rebuilding. Don't blame me. This is the reality. These are the numbers that we sit here and we face. Yet, and all I ask you to do is, I understand the posturing, Mr. Vice President, tone down the rhetoric, because you walked into a projection from July in the first quarter, which is exceedingly abundantly above and beyond what the projection even thought in the midst of COVID. And all I'm saying is, let's not get too happy, because the Bible also says the end of a matter is better than its beginning. We ain't finished with COVID yet. There's time enough for counting, Mr. Vice President, when the dealing's done. We don't know what we're going to deal with next year. So as it was stated by Mr. Alcides, because he said it too, that there was caution in that, because Senator the Honorable Michael Alcides, that there's caution, and I respect that, because it shows that he has his hand on the gas, he has his foot on the gas, but he also has his hand on the tiller wheel, but he's cautious because he anticipates there could be bumps. But he understands we need to go full speed ahead. You question about the economic performance of this administration. Let me remind you, before Dorian hit—
Please address the chair.
Let me, Mr. Vice President, through you, let me remind the body and the nation that just before Dorian hit, we had record unemployment levels in this country. The hike in VAT did not impact or cost that. The good Senator, Mr. Vice President, raised about the fall and the gross domestic product and purchasing and buying power. What do you expect when everybody locked down and shut down and everybody panic over what's going on here in COVID? People don't want to spend, be trying to figure out ways in which person could go to the food line and go to the food store. What do we expect when businesses had to shut down until we could adapt, improvise, and find a way to overcome the situation? What do you expect? You throwing numbers out. It's like complaining about a woman hair blowing out when she's standing in hurricane wind. We all live this, man. We all been through this. I sit here and I cannot imagine my brother, who was in the midst of Dorian with his people kicking down doors, going into government facilities to save lives. I could not imagine what he went through in there. I couldn't imagine when my leader, my now leader, Michael Pinter, had to get rescued and the water was in Freeport up to his house on the second floor. So all we simply saying is, don't throw this caring somewhere that may seem, I say seem, because I will not accuse the care for the less fortunate as negative, because I believe it's sincerely there. But there's care for all people, because when Dorian hit, all creatures great and small were scrambling. When COVID hit, everyone feel it, even those who had big bank accounts saw it starting to draw down. Now, they might have survived a little better than other people, but everybody felt it. So when we look here, I want to advise and I want to make a recommendation that we do treat our bread basket items as a city of refuge and not something that we would tax. And I understand what is trying to be done, but I'm simply saying there got to be some safeguard. I like the idea of it that there is something that can stay at its most basic minimum. So when the time comes that me or you, Mr. Vice President, ends up being, let's forget about the poor. Let's be selfish. Me and you end up to that point that we can only buy corned beef. That's all I'm simply saying. So let's not disregard, Mr. Vice President, through you, the bread basket item. Let's not disregard the medicines, because I know persons who have been calling me over and over, can't buy the insulin, can't buy the blood pressure medicine, can't pay for the heart medicine. And see, this is what we face now, because we got to look forward to say count the house and build a course. You're making these projections, and that's good. But there are unforeseen circumstances and things that are moving right about right now. on top of the bread basket item. See, it didn't go up 100%, you know, because 100% of zero is, guess what? Zero. So if you add 1 cent in tax on that, to bring it to 10%, that's almost 1,000%. But let's look at it this way. We are still dealing with unforeseen circumstances that will also impact the cost of these basic items. We have a logistical problem that's a nightmare worldwide. I have seen quotes on 40-foot containers that used to be like $4,000 to ship from, say, China here. I've seen ridiculous quotes up to $16,000, up to $30,000, because there's now a war, like a run on transshipment of goods and getting space. That's going to impact us because still 80% of what we need in this country is being brought here. So I accept the effort of, and I appreciate, because I raised in the last debate that the 10% will be, the effort is to extend it throughout, period, not just for 1 year. I accept that. But the reality is we are still going to be hit with a level of inflation across the board. And I would love the refuge of the bread basket to be there. I would like the refuge on certain medications to be there. I would like the refuge. I would like the person who could best withstand the storm. If you could buy a $2 million piece of property, we need that money. And I'd like for us to reinvent our tax system so that the rich, and many of our rich wouldn't mind paying more, you know, could actually go ahead. There's ways in which they can actually pay more. Then the world is also faced with a 15% international corporate tax, am I right, Mr. That's coming. How are we going to adjust to that as a country? You know what I'm saying? But in the midst of what I said, I'm still proud to say, hey, you know, that I believe we have good behemoths at the tiller. I believe Senator Al-Kidis is a sincere man. He don't want this country destroyed as much as me, and if anything bad happens, I think it will be an accident. It will never be from his heart. But we must look at all things and let us not remove the safeguards that were set there for the benefit of those who are currently in and who will find themselves in any position as life would allow. So let us not erase. Let us go down the road again and look at those things that we can again possibly zero rate. Let's look at additional avenues in which we can do. And I'll finally say this because one of the things that was raised by Mr. Simon Wilson when that caused me to say, and I want to say this clearly because I respect him too much in this court. He said may. He said may. He didn't say will. If he had said no, that would have been better. But he said may. That means probability, bam. He did not say it is being contemplated. He said may. I'm not going to add anything else to him. He said, as related to example, family islands that now have the benefit of not being to pay real property tax. Some of them may. So there will be some other form of taxation. And to end on a note that will also benefit our good Senator Quinton, that even when we move with the vax, there was a plethora of exemptions and reductions and elimination of duty that also cushion things. The list that Minister Al-Kidis read, clothing, duty exempt, a whole bunch of the stuff that he did. VAT might have been there, but the duty was cleared off, and quite frankly, duty is more than VAT. Duty is more than VAT, so you're paying 47% of something which one you prefer. To take the 47% off, you want to take the 12% off. So a number of things. And to this day, even now, small businesses starting their business in the first inventory can get it completely duty-free because we understand more to build this economy, we must build the small businesses and the entrepreneurial spirit. We must increase the footprint size of our economy and stop relying on these big edifices, which is now almost 60% owned by the Chinese. We need to pump more into our behemoths so the footprint of our economy is made up of people who born here and ain't going nowhere, who can keep their money here, not banks who can wake up one day and say, I even ain't gonna pay you 2% on the interest.
Senator, are you at the end of your contribution?
With that, Mr. Senator, I rest, and with Mr. Vice President, I rest, and I acknowledge I will support this bill for the good of those who are less fortunate. But I have to mention my concerns as it relates to matters arising in the same.
As many
President Muhammad Ali.
The chair recognizes Senator the Honorable Kirkland Russell.
Mr. Vice President, I am thankful to Almighty God. Thank you, my brother. Mr. Vice President, I am thankful to Almighty God to be able once again to stand in this honored place and speak on behalf of the people of this wonderful country. Again, I am thankful to our Prime Minister and Minister of Finance, the Honorable Philip Brave Davis, for the opportunity to serve as an honorable senator. I stand to give my full support for the 2021-22 Supplementary Budget, which was passed in the House of Assembly last week. Before I begin my contribution, Mr. Vice President, allow me to congratulate the Honorable Glenys Hannah Martin, Minister of Education, for making our nation so proud as she served as acting Prime Minister of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas last week. Mr. Vice President, Mr. Vice President, I offer condolences to Ms. Renee Taylor, who laid her one and only child, 39 years old son, to rest on Saturday. I also offer heartfelt condolences to the families of those victims in Grand Bahama who have been killed recently through gun violence, specifically within the 8 Mile Rock and Pindus Point communities. Mr. Vice President, Kimmy Grant was one of the 2 men gunned down on Thanksgiving in Hannah Hill, 8 Mile Rock. I met him while on the campaign trail. He was so excited to vote for the first time, and he was excited to vote for a new day. Then there was young Mr. Kevon Jane from Pindus Point, the 17-year-old young adult. He was gunned down just Friday, right in front of his friends, you know. Everyone in the neighborhood would tell you that even though he was autistic, he was already a skilled, naturally gifted auto mechanic. Mr. Vice President, Kevon was shot while changing bricks pads on a vehicle, earning an honest dollar. I pray for justice in all these matters, and I pray that God would bring comfort to the families and friends of all those who lost to gun violence. These incidents, Mr. Vice President, have been heartbreaking, to say the least, and it makes me wonder how far our society has spiraled out of control. Both 8 Mile Rock and Pindus Point have always been known as 2 of those family-oriented communities where everyone knew each other, looked out for each other, and respected each other. These brazen killings have left many within those communities in a state of shock and fear. Life as we know it, Mr. Vice President, is not the same. Even as the police carry out their investigations and are doing all they can to bring some sense of calm back to those communities, I want to appeal to the young people, especially the young men, who may be frustrated, angry for whatever reason, who may have felt left out, and who may feel lost, to think before acting and lashing out with violence. Think before getting involved in gangs. Think before picking up a gun. I beg you, reach out for help. Find a friend, a pastor, an uncle, an aunt, someone you can trust, and talk things out. Mr. Vice President, I am convinced that this government came to office understanding the crisis associated with violence, abuse, crime,
and other social ills impacting the youth of the nation. Thus, this administration will seek to maximize the full potential of urban renewal. This internationally recognized program, along with other agencies, will have the responsibility to implement and manage social outreach programs, mentoring programs, relief programs, sporting, beautification, musical, skills training, health, wellness, disciplinary, and religious programs that will link our children and parents and caregivers with as many government agencies, churches, and NGOs that are necessary to provide help that is needed to motivate, inspire, and save the lives of our young people. What's more, Mr. Vice President, is that we have to hit the reset button now on these programs in hope that with a comprehensive approach to holistically developing the children, we can also begin the process of helping to limit and eventually eliminate domestic violence surge in our country. Mr. Vice President, that is why those of us who have the privilege to serve in these honorable places must demonstrate decency, respect, and courtesy towards each other, especially to those in authority. The children are watching. Mr. Vice President, as we push to reset back to the concept of a village growing up a child, I am sure that with your guidance, this Honorable Senate will be a model of excellence for the village to follow. To the proposed supplementary budget. Speaking about reset buttons, Mr. Vice President, this supplementary budget, which is the first for the Davis administration government, is like hitting the reset button on the popular video games today. While real-life reset buttons are for the most part not real, this supplementary budget will allow the government of the Bahamas an opportunity not to undo all of the bad that may have come as a result of the choices and decisions of the previous administration, but it will allow this administration to begin making the necessary changes that will help steer our country out of the bad situation it presently finds itself. Mr. Vice President, this supplementary budget will only begin the process of addressing the immediate needs of getting the country up and running again, and will set the groundwork for the kind of economic recovery, rebuilding, and revolutionizing that is so badly needed. But again, unlike video games, which allows a clean restart, this budget will not allow the government to restart everything, but it will allow the government to bring relief to our people now, while looking ahead for future growth. This is no doubt going to be an uphill battle, but one which I know this administration is up to the task. Mr. Vice President, although the Bahamian people overwhelmingly voted for a new day, bringing about that new day has necessitated the reallocation of budget resources to achieve some new day policy objective. Keyword being reallocation and not additional sums of monies. While the original fiscal year 2021-2022 budget expressed some intention to focus on the restoration of the Bahamian economy, it did not go far enough to alleviate the suffering of Bahamians. Thus, this supplementary budget reallocates already approved budgetary resources to key areas that directly supports individuals and homes, such as increasing pensions for public servants, expanding the COVID-19 unemployment benefit assistance, and reinstating payments for promotions, confirmation, and increments. And Mr. Vice President, I am pleased to say that the work has already begun. Mr. Vice President, while this supplementary budget has been designed to address these immediate special needs throughout the Bahamas, I would like to focus on some of the specific needs of the people of Grand Bahama. I know that there may be some who may get tired of me talking specifically about Grand Bahama. But Mr. Vice President, I am obligated as a senator from Grand Bahama, not only to stand up for the good and highlight the achievements of this administration and work towards helping my government and all Bahamian people, but also to address the specific needs of a people with whom I live, socialize, and worship. There's a popular saying, he who feels it knows it. And as a Grand Bahamian, Mr. Vice President, I have lived through the good times and the bad times. So I stand in solidarity with my fellow Grand Bahamian colleagues who are doing an excellent job in presenting the needs of Grand Bahama in this place as well in that other place. I want to talk a little bit about unemployment. Mr. Vice President, if I was forced to describe the people of Grand Bahama in one word, it would be resilient. When you consider that since 1992, Grand Bahama Island has been directly hit with more than 10 hurricanes, with more than half of that number being major hurricanes. This number does not include tropical storms or hurricanes that did not hit the island directly, but which still had some negative effects. And yet, Grand Bahamians are still standing, surviving, and doing their best to live day by day and make ends meet. Mr. Vice President, a drive around the island of Grand Bahama would quickly turn into a testimonial of mass exodus that has taken place. And far too many homes, stores, businesses are left abandoned, serving as old cobwebbed monuments of the once magic city economy that is in need of dire help. It is heartbreaking, Mr. Vice President, and with no proper airport, harbor, or hospital, Grand Bahama tourism sector has also taken a severe hit, and we know it's going to take a Herculean effort to rescue the sector. But yet again, this is a task that this administration is built to handle. Mr. Vice President, in the midst of this bleak picture that does not resemble the future look of Grand Bahama, I am thankful for the attention and interest in which our Prime Minister and Minister of Finance, the Honorable Philip Davis, and the entire cabinet has given to Grand Bahama in the first 10 weeks in office. Mr. Vice President, I am pleased to inform the Senate that many cabinet ministers have made frequent trips to the second city to meet with and talk to not only government employees there, but also to meet and talk with the island stakeholders, business owners, as well as to everyday people on the island with the hopes of finding the right answers needed to restart Grand Bahama's economy. This government is committed to living up to its promise of making Grand Bahama grand again. Mr. Vice President, since the opening of the Honorable House of Assembly on October 6th, the following ministers, parliamentarians, has visited Grand Bahama. Honorable I. Chester Cooper, Honorable Fred Mitchell, Honorable Dr. Michael Dowell, our very own Senator, the Honorable Ryan Pinder, Honorable Alfred Sayers, Honorable Clay Sweeting, Honorable Jobette Colby Davis, Honorable Keith Bell, Honorable Mario Boleg, Honorable Pierre Glover Roll, Honorable Miles LaRota, Parliamentary Secretaries, Mr. John Pinder, Mr. Barkers Roll, Mr. Leonardo Lightburn, and Mr. Jamal Strong. Mr. Vice President, not included on this list are the Honorable Ginger Moxie, Minister of Grand Bahama, and Honorable Obadiah Wilchcombe, Minister of Social Services and Urban Development, who are also MPs in Grand Bahama, who both work without taking a day off, fighting to bring business, relief, hope, and opportunities to the island of Grand Bahama. Mr. Vice President, not only is this Davis administration committed to reducing the unemployment numbers throughout the country, it is fair to say that special emphasis has already been placed on Grand Bahama and Abaco when it comes to providing adequate and timely relief and supporting those Northern Islands with the full weight of the government. To quote the Prime Minister, this supplementary budget is just the beginning of addressing the immediate needs to get the economy up and running again and sets the groundwork for a plan for fiscal recovery and economic growth, which the country desperately needs, social relief needs. Mr. Vice President, the progressive problems which Grand Bahamians have faced over the years, combined with persistent high unemployment numbers, have necessitated many to lean more on government assistance programs. As a result, it has become important for more social relief to come to the people of Grand Bahama and Abaco. That in itself sounds like a contradiction because Grand Bahamians and Abaconians are very proud people and they are not quick to ask for nor accept handout. But the fact that thousands of our people now depend and look forward to government assistance is indication that the hardship is real. I am happy, Mr. Vice President, to see that the government will not only continue and extend the food assistance program, but they have gone a step further and are giving a little extra help just for Christmas to those people who are still unemployed. I am also happy, Mr. Vice President, to see that the unemployment benefits are going to be continued and those who may have fallen through the cracks will be rescued. Mr. Vice President, with the Department of Social Services taking over the feeding program, I suspect that hundreds, if not thousands, of deserving people who are in need but were left off the previous gravy train will finally get the help they desire. Mr. Vice President, there is still a critical need for reconstruction, roof repairs, and infrastructure replacement for many homes, roads, schools, docks, and cemeteries in Grand Bahama and Abaco. I know this is hard to believe, but the truth is, more than 2 years after Hurricane Dorian, this is the reality for far too many communities in Grand Bahama and Abaco. Thank God for sparing us these past 2 hurricane seasons. I know that Grand Bahama and Abaco are very thankful to God for that. This breaks give this caring government an opportunity to get these homes properly repaired. I want to speak a little bit about the DRA as well. Mr. Vice President, in a speech to introduce this supplementary budget to Parliament, the Honorable Prime Minister pointed out that the budget seeks to achieve 3 major goals: provide much needed relief to the Bahamian people. It reallocates funding to match the ministerial portfolios of the government, as stated earlier, and it provides funding for critical expenditures which were neglected by the previous administration. With all the needed relief that is coming for Grand Bahama and Abaco under this new administration, a part of that relief must and will include finishing the work which was left undone by the previous administration under the Disaster Reconstruction Authority. Mr. Vice President, for many people living in Grand Bahama and Abaco, the Disaster Reconstruction Authority was exactly that, a disaster. While the DRA did some things in Grand Bahama and Abaco following Hurricane Dorian, there was much, much more that could have been done. The help appeared anemic at best and came sparsely and too slow. This New Day administration is committed to ensuring that all the homes in Grand Bahama and Abaco that were damaged by Hurricane Dorian, that are still damaged, gets repaired. The reduction of VAT to 10%. Mr. Vice President, this supplementary budget forecasts a reduction in the nominal rate of VAT from 12% to 10%. It also envisages the elimination of zero rating and subsequent reintroduction of the application of the standard rate of VAT. on a wide variety of products, largely related to the 22 breadbasket items. The new VAT system also seeks to restore previous imbalances in the VAT regime, such as allowing for VAT refunds on transshipment services when these services did not earn any VATable revenue in the Bahamas. Mr. Vice President, while those opposite may try to divert attention from this matter by pointing at breadbasket items and crying shame for putting VAT on those 22 items, the truth is this change reduced VAT on thousands of food items, all building materials, and all goods and services, and even put VAT on fuel for private jets and transshipment services, which under the former administration was not happening. Mr. Vice President, I just want to remind the Senate, there's a lot of talk about the corned beef and the breadbasket items. But I just want to remind the Senate of when the side opposite increased VAT by 60% and placed the zero rate on the same breadbasket items. The Bahamian people took to the streets and told them to keep your corned beef. I brought my shirt that I wore just to show you it is true. It appears as if they have forgotten that. Additionally, Mr. Vice President, the zero rating approach was extremely poorly conceived because according to the Bahamas National Statistical Institute 2013 household expenditure survey and the 2001 living condition survey, Bahamian household spending patterns have not changed significantly over the past 20 years. The Bahamas National Statistical Institute data reveals that the breadbasket items that are zero rated comprise less than 3% of household consumption, and they account for a very, very small portion of the household budget. Mr. Vice President, on the other hand, the result of the zero rating system was that hotels, restaurants, businesses that consumes large quantities of all these breadbasket items paid no VAT to the government on those items, resulting in the loss of millions of dollars in revenue. Mr. Vice President, I must remind all and sundry that this proposed budget does not reimpose VAT on home insurance or on the rental of non-commercial properties. This new VAT proposal will not make any changes to items such as residential electricity under $300, water bills under $50, education services, gambling and lotteries, daycare services, or certain charitable services, as these items are exempted from VAT and will remain exempted. Mr. Vice President, with the proposed changes to VAT, to the value-added tax set to begin January of next year, it is fair to conclude that this New Day administration is setting the stage for a new year with economic savings for many Bahamians. Mr. Vice President, the fact that the government proposes to reinstate the RISE program, a social support program to provide direct cash transfers to those in need of help, will be the safety net for the vulnerable. This certainly looks like a win-win situation for everyone. It is a productive and progressive approach. All of these measures and other such measures to come have but one ultimate goal: to improve the lives, economic situations, and living conditions of all Bahamians. That is the passion and compassion that drives this Davis administration, and that is the promise that I stand on, that this New Day government will indeed bring a new day, a new economic outlook, a new future for all, including my people in the second city. And so, with that, Mr. Vice President, I stand in support of this supplementary budget. May God bless the government of the Bahamas, and may God continue to bless the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. Thank you, Mr. Vice President.
As many
I get you.
The chair recognizes Senator the Honorable Darren Pickstock.
Mr. Vice President, my Senate colleagues, my parents tell me that in their early childhood, and they are almost certain about my early adolescence, that certain vaccines were administered to children in what appeared to be a small sugar cube. The vaccine or medicine was of course embedded in this confectionery delight and would have been very palatable to kids. I used this alliteration to jumpstart my contribution on this supplementary budget, because the government must be commended for not going the easy, deceptive route of sugar coating our economic realities. The Honorable Prime Minister and Minister of Finance, in his communication in that other place on this matter, which we now debate today, is an epic discourse on the government's financial posture, its policy plans and projections and details, vigorously laid out how the government intends to meet challenges of this country. No sugarcoating. The people deserve the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. When the citizens get the unvarnished truth and know the role they are expected to play, and the government gives its solemn affirmation of the role it will play, the democracy is deepened. And by consensus, we have a stronger united Bahamas. The stark importance of honest and frank discussions with the Bahamian people by their government and their elected and appointed legislators on matters of fiscal importance cannot be overstated. The government cannot achieve any of these goals or projections without the full cooperation and support of the Bahamian people. In order to garner that support, the government has laid out in black and white for all and sundry to debate, dissect, of course, and improve upon. Mr. Vice President, that seems like a reliable and focused start to achieve a new day. For a very long time, we labored under an assumption in this country that the government has a printing press in some secure basement or underneath one of our historic forts, where the country just print money to pay for government expenditure. Or furthermore, if the money press could not be churned out fast enough, then the government was expected to go borrow it, get a loan. And only in the Bahamas, when we talk about the government getting a loan, few, if any, are concerned about how to pay it back. Indeed, Mr. Vice President, when certain sectors made demands on the government as to what they rightfully thought was theirs, just and fair entitlement, They coached their demands in a language which suggested, you are the government, you have the money, you better go find it. Or in the words of J.G. Wentworth, it's my money and I want it now. The communication which we are debating is very sanitizing and lively and has, if I can borrow from another popular commercial ditty, that gain or tide detergent freshness. The government is having a frank conversation with the Bahamian people on how, where, when, and why this economy will move, and how the government is forecasting and working towards certain projections. And in the interim, what is going to take place to ensure these projections are accomplished? The government must continue to alleviate the suffering and disruption caused by Dorian and the trauma of unemployment from COVID. The government in this communication is demonstrating the approach it intends to take to stimulate the economy and to put our financial house in order. Mr. Vice President, in order for us to do our jobs in this place, we too must follow the lead of the Minister of Finance and not sugarcoat the economic realities of this country. This means that contrary to what was once a considered perception, in this place, we are no rubber stamp. In this place, we are the check and the balance to the quality of what legislation and policy is passed on the Bahamian society for application. Here, we have the responsibility to check and recheck, test and retest, examine and re-examine, ask the tough questions until we get answers. And then in our debate and discourse and the conclusion of the process, pass this information on to the Bahamian people. The temptation to score brownie points is alive and active. The temptation to show off and grandstand is woven into that same subjective tapestry. I submit, Mr. Vice President, that everyone in this place should rise above party politics, personal agendas, or ambitions when it comes to the unified work and approach the Bahamian people need and are required, for we are in this place to do our part and contribute in a meaningful way with the getting of our country's financial house in order. Having said that, I am not about who did what yesterday and how this was done last Friday or where this happens a year or two ago. We are in the now. The present, the world is spinning on its axis and no country is waiting for the Bahamas to catch up. We have to do that for ourselves. I want to look at the government's rationale on VAT being placed on previous non-vatable items. This has been the meatless bone which some continue to chew on. I want to quote liberally from an opinion on this issue. Open quote. Why is VAT now being applied to these previously zero-rated items? While the original intent of zero-rating breadbasket items may have been to provide relief to low-income households, this approach was extremely poorly conceived. According to the Bahamas National Statistics Institute 2013, and my colleague, Mr. Russell, Senator Russell, would have alluded to this, Household Expenditure Survey and the 2001 Living Conditions Survey, Bahamian households' spending patterns have not changed significantly. Over the past 20 years, Bahamian households still consume the same goods that they purchased 20 years ago. The Bahamas National Statistical Institute data reveals that bread basket items that are zero rated comprise less than 3% of household consumption. While items such as milk and margarine may be a staple in Bahamian homes, they account for a minute portion of the household budget. The result of the zero rating regime is that hotels, restaurants, and businesses who consume large quantities of items such as cheese, mayonnaise, butter, tomato paste, and were able to pay VAT, paid no VAT to government. End quote. Mr. Vice President, our jurisdiction is one of the last in this region to adopt the VAT regime. As in all such circumstances, new studies and the actual application of the law or policies exposes its strengths and weaknesses, the sum of which could not have been felt or known before the new regime went into place. This is, of course, why a huge portion of the work that comes before us today are amendments to existing legislation as time has brought about new occurrences, a new shift in policy directions. What I find most commendable about this new approach and honesty and sincerity of the Minister of Finance communication is that the VAT regime was introduced under a government in which he previously served. The Minister of Economic Affairs also served in that administration. Mr. Vice President, for these two leaders of the country to boldly confront what may have been poorly conceived at the outset and now move with the haste to correct and shore up a situation is indicative of this government's maturity and its seriousness on good fiscal house for our country. Mr. Vice President, another area of which I make commentary is in the area of tax reform and new equitable tax incentives. These areas require calm and level heads, and for the cynics and political scarecrows to stay away. It seems as if we cannot get meaningful dialogue as a people on these issues because there are so many ripe and ready to cause mischief, dislocation, and confusion. These troublemakers and cowards hide behind their juvenile posting on social media. They pretend to be lettered economists, thinkers, and planners, when in fact, most of them can't even qualify as gravediggers. They don't know the shovel from the handle. But they have social media and they are in love with their ignorance, masquerading as pseudo-intelligence. We in this country and as a people have so much ground to cover, and it's important decisions to make. The decision to make vatable that which before was non-vatable also suggests, whether we realize it or not, that while we may be in the same basket, we are different sizes, different colors, different fruits, different vegetables, and different stages of green, ripening, ripe, or overripe. What I do mean by that, what I simply mean, Mr. Vice President, is that there is a concern in our country that net worth, earnings, benefits should be the pendulum on how we move towards a more taxable base, or equitable, for that matter, taxable base. For those who are uncomfortable with the term, let those who have more pay more, I wish to simply point them to what the National Statistical Institute concluded. Whilst the perception was bread basket items, namely mayonnaise, butter, tuna, etc., and by its connect bread basket is equated with the grassroots and the small man and the indigent. The fact of the matter is the big boys, the mega boys, the real players were consuming and purchasing much more of the breadbasket items than the grassroots. And they who could afford to pay more were paying nothing. And the Bahamian people on a whole were shortchanged. But it does not stop there. The finding from the National Statistical Institute gives the Honorable Minister of Economic Affairs the onerous task of deciphering this information and providing the safety net that distinguishes the haves from the have-not, and to assert a framework that is equitable and fair and balanced. Mr. Vice President, I want to look at the alarming joblessness in this country. We are told from NIB that there are currently 17,000 persons receiving COVID unemployment relief benefits. We are also told that after Dorian, there is a further 21,800 persons displaced from the jobs, income lost, and simply unemployed. And the 17,000 relying on the NIB relief benefits are not connected to the 21,800 filling out applications for Walk, Street, and Company. Mr. Vice President, it is as serious as it gets. These are our Bahamian brothers and sisters. Someone used to say, our work shall not be done until we wipe the tear from every eye. Mr. Vice President, those figures suggest that there are a lot of tears on these islands. Those figures suggest that grandstanding and duplicitous talk, which is already disingenuous, should be marked absent going forward in the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. As legislators, we should wake up every morning knowing and doing that thing, that act, whatsoever it is, to get the figures in the two columns I just mentioned reduced until it comes down to zero. We in this honorable place must show that we are prepared to work across the aisles to do better and to bring better for our people. We should not waste the people's time with self-serving political rhetoric about pre-September 16, 2021. The voters have already spoken, and the people have sung the last mile of the way. And just a week ago, one side even chose their new Moses. The era of the two Huberts is over. Now is the time to focus on the business of getting the Bahamian economy working better for all of us and getting people off the unemployment line and off the breast of NIB. Our people are proud and conscientious. They don't like handouts. They like to do their own things. They like to pay their own way. The overwhelming majority of these affected people want to be seen to be doing their part to make it happen in the shortest possible time. Let us restore the dignity and the hardworking women and men of the entire Bahamas. Mr. Vice President, that is what this supplemental budget is seeking to do. It is seeking to wipe the tear from every eye. It is taking a politically mature approach to the fiscal situation in the country and doing the singular act of responsible governing, which is to choose. Mr. Vice President, this supplemental budget is unlike any other supplemental budget ever presented in this country. This 2021 supplemental budget is the buffoon of the Dorian displacement crisis and the COVID pandemic gut-wrenching blow to the Bahamian economy. Yes, we are seeing some improvements, yet every day we live with the realization that COVID and its antecedents can deal us another displacement. Some countries have shut their borders for periods as new variants emerge. Mr. Vice President, this supplemental budget as I said, is uniquely different from all that were tabled and passed before. This is in the mandate given to a new administration just 81 days ago. That convincing mandate is to chart a new course for the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. Mr. Vice President, I don't think there is one person in this chamber who wants to see the Bahamas fail. I know no one in this chamber is happy knowing 17,000 persons are today dependent on a stipend from NIB, and 21,800 persons are unemployed post-Dorian. Mr. Vice President, this country expects focused, disciplined, sturdy, and firm leadership. They want leadership that does not cringe in the face of obstacles, nor sugarcoat the harsh realities, nor grandstand with self-serving television commercials. Crybaby is over. Let's get on with our job. Let's move this country and get our people back to work. Let's become the most proficient, efficient, reliant economy in this hemisphere in the post-COVID era. And let's do it as Bahamians. Mr. Vice President, I support this supplemental budget, and I encourage everyone in this chamber to so speak to it that our people have hope in this nation's reliance and faith that their legislators have their backs. No sugarcoating. The facts, the cold, hard facts, and the people will respect us even more. Thank you, Vice President.
As many,
Thank you, Mr. Vice.
the chair recognizes Senator the Honorable Darren Henfield.
I rise in these hallowed halls to contribute to this debate on the 2021-2022 Supplementary Budget. Before I do so, please permit me this occasion to congratulate the Honorable Michael C. Pentard, MP for Marco City, on his achievement of becoming the leader of the Free National Movement, and by extension, the leader of Her Majesty's loyal opposition. I've had the privilege of working with our leader for the past 4.5 years, and I find him to be forthright, focused, goal-oriented, committed to achieving the task at hand. And so I have no doubt that he will lead us to victory in 2026. Mr. Vice President, permit me also to thank our outgoing leader, the former Prime Minister, the Most Honorable Dr. Hubert Minnis, who was called to serve at perhaps the most trying period in the modern history of the Bahamas. I often compared him to wartime leaders because God knows Dorian and COVID-19 are nothing short of war. You know, Mr. Vice President, I believe that we are at an extremely critical juncture in the development of our country. We simply cannot, and we must not, just continue business as usual. And so I agree with Senator Pickstock and wish to say to the government side, you won. I mean, I thought it'd be obvious that there's no longer a need for rally rhetoric and the rest of it that comes along with gloating on more rhetoric, especially in this noble place. I watched the PLP government over the last few weeks, and despite their mantra declaring a new day, it is clear that we are seeing some of the same old PLP. Mr. Vice President, the Carnival fiasco now is here, setting up and getting ready to open to the public. And the last I heard from the minister responsible of health, they were yet to be approved by the committee responsible. These are the healthcare professionals and others. Start the way we operate in a new day. Come bring your things, set them up, and then get approvals later. Who's in charge here? There's also a concern about the 20,000 vaccines that are still here that will expire, I believe, by the end of this month. We need to find a way to get them in the hands of Bahamians or do something with them rather than to allowing them to sit there and just expire. Bearing in mind that these, I believe, were donated and would prove to be a grave embarrassment on the government and people of the Bahamas. And all this, whilst Bahamians hired by a duly elected government are still undergoing review by the Ministry of the Public Service. And we could hear the bells of Christmas ringing, ding dong, ding dong. Mr. Vice President, it always amazes me when I hear members opposite assert that the Free National Movement don't care about the poor. You know, I think Senator Pickstock put it rightly. Each of us in this noble place, each of us who come to public service, we come because we believe we can help and make a difference. I want to emphatically and categorically state that the last administration of which I was a part did more for the underprivileged and challenged over the one term. The minister could check the records if you're looking at economics than any other government in the history of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. When COVID-19 hit, we introduced a policy that would allow water and light to remain on despite, it was under, I think it was $200, despite the challenges that we faced. We did not terminate one single government employee, not one. In fact, we extended the 52-week program to allow for more homes in the Bahamas to have a little income. Between NIB and the government, some $242.6 million and counting, because this government continues the program, was paid out to the unemployed. Government is continuous. That's why when some bills are left, the senator will tell you, you have to secure them. That's the way government works. Our administration provided thousands of tablets and devices for students to do online classes. We introduced free attendance to the University of the Bahamas and to BTVI for all who qualified in the Bahamas who wished to attend. I have to remind you of this, of some of the things that we did. At the height of the food assistance program, I'm advised that some 57,000 different households received assistance over time, and I'm happy to hear that the government will continue to assist Bahamians in need. We opened subsidiary passport offices in Inagua, Exuma, Long Island, and Eleuthera so that the residents of those islands could keep more monies in their pockets. So, because, they no longer have to travel to New Providence just to get a passport. Everybody know and appreciate what is going on with digitization, which this government continues. And I believe we are going to get there. And so, Mr. Vice President, that brings me to the matter at hand, the Value-Added Tax Amendment Bill number 2. I'm hearing this refrain about how not only those low and middle income individuals benefited from the zero rating on the bread basket, but also big companies. And I thought that would be a good place for us, because you don't want to punish the low and middle income families just in order to cure the mischief of the big companies, the big hotels and the restaurants. Because when you go to treat at these institutions in these places, you're going to pay. They don't. Senator Rami put it quite candidly. They don't eat the cost. They pass that on to the consumer. I just thought I'd put that right there before I move on. The Minister of Finance in his supplementary budget statement delivered in the Honorable House of Assembly on the 27th of October 2021 stated the following, open quote, "One of the most discussed and anticipated aspects of my government's economic plan is to decrease in the nominal rate of value-added tax from 12 to 10%. This reduction in VAT was proposed to offer modest, important relief to Bahamians, and I'm very pleased to announce we are moving forward with this reduction in the VAT rate," end quote. And then the Honorable Prime Minister proceeded to vocalize plans to remove zero rating on the breadbasket items, which benefited low and middle income families. The value-added tax amendment bill was tabled in the House. You know, let me just stop right there and look at another quote from the Prime Minister, and because this one made me miss E.J. Bowe. Most of you in here are probably not old enough to remember him. The Honorable Prime Minister went on to say, and I quote, "With the reduction in VAT rate, we are eliminating the zero rating under VAT on a variety of items. Price controls are in place to ensure breadbasket items will be fairly priced," end quote. And that one caused me to recall a gentleman by the name of E.J. Bowe. I think he was in one of the Consumer Affairs divisions, price control, where he went into the food stores, and constantly we would see him on the televisions calling out institutions, supermarkets that were not operating in accordance to the price control list. And so if we're going to do this again, I think we're going to have to augment that area of price control so we can have sufficient personnel, Minister, that would be able to really watch what is going on in these food stores. And so the value-added tax amendment number 2 bill was tabled in the House of Assembly on the 10th of November, 2021, and is scheduled to come into force on the 1st of January. And then the results, clause 3 of the bill, which seeks to amend the first schedule to the Act to remove the zero-rated application from what we call the breadbasket. Among other things, to ease administration. You know, when I concluded this, that I don't think is an unreasonable conclusion. A single mother with a low-income working family, she's not concerned about a bureaucrat having issues with administration or something that can take place at the point of sale, at the cash register. She's concerned about every day going to the food store, the little moms and pops in the neighborhood, and getting a meal for her family. Administration is the last thing on her mind. That's the last thing on her mind. She's trying to survive trying times, and every day to make ends meet. You know, to her, what a number cruncher runs into as a vicissitude in life, that's the least thing on her mind. Bread basket items like butter, we heard the minister elucidate them clearly in here today. I want to read them myself. Like butter, like margarine, like bread, like mayonnaise, like mustard, like grits, and we get the baby formula, baby food, powder detergent, soaps, and sanitary napkins, and tampons, and napkins. And I heard one woman say recently on air that these feminine products perhaps should be always free of VAT and duty, because this is a natural part of the life of the human existence. And as if that were not enough, the local sale of medicines and medicinal drugs, also previously zero rated, will also be taxed for this bill. Yeah, we understand how that works. My father uses it. You know, I heard my colleague brother here talk about how difficult it is when you run into trying circumstances in your life, and you really need all the help in the world that you can get. Sometimes it's so difficult to access the bureaucracy to get some help. And so this is something we have to continue to work on as governments. Mr. Vice President, in truth, what we on this side would like to see is an expansion of the so-called bread basket to include more healthy choices, like fruits and vegetables. And I have a report here, I believe, that was done by the National Bread Basket Review. That's what it's called? The National Bread Basket Review and Recommendations, National Bread Basket Review Forum Report and Recommendations. And this was prepared by Dr. Sharita Davis Moxie on December 2017 and revised on the 22nd of January 2018, the Ministry of Health. And some of the things that we would like to see included in the basket, instead of putting more than 100% we putting back on it, because if you If you look at it, I've heard some calculations about perhaps even 130% we're putting back in the bread basket. Like beans and peas, right? I mean, we know we have these issues with communicable diseases that cause there to be a high rate of high blood pressure and diabetes in our country. Like no salt seasonings, like peanut butter and peanuts and nuts, fresh oranges and fresh bananas and fresh grapes, strawberries. These are the things that we would like to see. If you want to change around the bread basket, take some items out and put in some. You know how this is. Yeah. And there's spinach and kale, things that were cabbage and carrots, things that would cause us to live a little longer. That's the suggestion that we want to make to the yes, I'll do.
Thank you, Mr. Senator Enfield. Mr. Vice President, I think this is a convenient time. The Senator has, it's a convenient time.
Yes, sir.
The Senator has said it's a convenient time for us to suspend for the luncheon suspension. So, Mr. Vice President, I move that the business of the Senate do suspend until 3 p.m. this afternoon.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay. It has been moved and seconded that the business of the Senate be suspended until 3 p.m. this afternoon. As many are in favor, say aye. Those opposed, say nay. The ayes have it. The motion is agreed. The business of this Senate stands suspended until 3 p.m.
Mike?